Good morning and welcome. This video is entitled Communication. It supplements Chapter 8 of the Project Management Technology course. Dr. James Reneau Ph.D. from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this presentation. In this video, we're going to talk about why communication is so hard, specifically the network model. We're going to talk about visual and in-person meetings, virtual and in-person meetings. We're going to talk about scheduled versus impromptu meetings. We're going to discuss various ways that we can communicate in a project scenario. And we're going to talk about some factors we need to consider in all of our communications. Communication, we've said throughout the course and throughout other lectures, that it is kind of the make or break thing in any project. If a project manager and the team members don't communicate well, the project is destined to fail. It's going to be difficult to succeed. Pay special attention to the message that you're sending and make sure that it's received. Not just so many times, well, I told you, didn't understand here. So be sure that we pay attention to the that I think are part of communication and actually come from a book back in the 1960s called Games People Play by Dr. Eric Byrne. And he said that what we need to pay attention to is what we mean to say. What we actually said or how we say it, and then how it was received. Because if we don't pay attention to all three parts of our communication, I might tell you to do something. But if I tell you in a way that makes it seem like a joke, then you might not do it. So it might have been received as well. It's serious. So be sure that we say what we mean. We pay attention to how we say it, tone, and the method. And then we also have to pay attention to how it's received. Remember, communicating is active. It's an active verb, communicating. Takes all parties, both sides, the sender and the receiver, to be able to be involved in good communications. There's kind of a kooky pop song done by a band I love, Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, back in the 90s on their Left of Cool album. And as I was preparing this lecture, I was playing this in the background. One of the lyrics, or four lines of the lyrics, the refrain from the tune just stuck in my head, and I wanted to just say them to you. And if you get a chance, go out on YouTube or go out somewhere and listen to this tune. You might like is a jazz pop banjo player who leads a band with his banjo. It's kind of an interesting combination. But the communication is the only way. Start saying what you mean to say. All your troubles are going to run away. Start saying what you mean today. I think that's just really powerful stuff. So why is communication so difficult? Well, one of the reasons communication is difficult is represented here in the network model. In the network model, we map all of the paths between all of the individuals in a communication environment. So, for instance, if we have three people and we want to get a message distributed among three people, there are three paths. You can see that in the diagram in the middle. Three people, three paths. Nice and easy. Now, if you have four people, there are actually six paths in a communication between four people. And if you have a communication between eight people, that would be times 7 divided by 2, which would be 28 different paths between 8 people. Imagine if you had to communicate between 100 people. That would be 100 times 99 or 100 times 99 or 990 divided by 2 or 400 plus different paths. So it gets to be extremely complex to communicate in in an environment of more than two or three or five. And you need to pay very special attention that your message, you said what you meant to say, and that it was received, understood. That's the hard portion. An essential part of communication was the receiver. And receivers to practice active listening as much as possible. Active listening, because listening is a verb, it's also an action. And we must learn and practice how to listen. There are some tips here. Be interested, pay attention, make eye contact, make the speaker feel comfortable and welcome. Don't kind of be playing on your phone and ignoring the speaker or doing something else. Pay attention. Look at them. Listen. Take notes. But make them feel comfortable. When the speaker comes to a break, don't interrupt them. Don't. When a speaker comes to a break, it's always helpful to come back and say, "So, what I heard you say is," recap, told, heard in your own words. At that point, the speaker is fully aware that you understood. The message was sent, heard the message, I received the message, and I understand the message. I was able to recap it back to you in my own words. And sometimes listening, the receiver will send back and say, "Well, what I heard you say was blah, blah." And the speaker's going to scratch their head and go, "But that's not what I told you. Here, this is what I really meant." And by going through this process of being active as a listener and reiterating what we heard, we're sure to have received the message. Sender is sure that we received the right message. Again, listening is also an action verb. Takes two. Meetings. How many times have we to go to a organization or a club or a work meeting? It's like, oh darn it. We're going to see meetings become more and more virtual over the next few years as more employees work in a distributed as work changes. But what we have to do is we have to make fighting, we have to make them easy, we have to make it comfortable. We have to make sure that we do get the interaction. And with the online tools that exist, like Collaborate and YouTube and Zoom, FaceTime, and all of the others, and all the others that are going to follow, we'll develop an even better way to do it. Pay attention to best practices. Into really horrible online meeting sessions. You know what a bad one looks like, so you can not do that. Good one. In a project, we usually have several meetings. And the big meeting that we have is the kickoff meeting. The kickoff meeting was discussed in Chapter 6. It's where we talk about the presentations of the project. There are also closing meetings and closing meetings at the end of the project, or they can happen as we reach certain milestones, as we reach the end of certain phases. It's a time where we get acceptance from our stakeholders, shareholders, sponsors, and others to release the resources and to get acceptance and to continue moving forward. So remember, you will be hosting these meetings both face to face and virtual. Meetings come in two the scheduled meeting and the impromptu meeting. An impromptu meeting is a meeting that didn't have a schedule. We were going to be, maybe we ran across each other at a conference or a hall or somewhere else or some other meeting, or they're not as formal. So a scheduled meeting needs to be announced in advance and scheduled. Be sure that all of the members, all the attendees know in advance it's going to happen. Have an agenda. Be sure to have the agenda published in advance and sent to all of the members of the meeting and come into that meeting ready to go. If you come into that scheduled meeting not ready, disheveled, not following the agenda, it's really going to waste everyone's time and really undermine your. Be very careful to have the agenda, have it published in advance, and come in. An impromptu meeting is spur of the moment, not scheduled. It's often a more informal. And the trick is that if you've developed trust and you've listened to your team members and you've listened to your stakeholders and your shareholders and your sponsor, you can often get some magic during an impromptu meeting. You'll say, "Well, Bob," you'll say, "How's it going? What are you working? Are there any issues? How's your team work?" You may just get some real gems, some real insights that you get any other. So impromptu meetings are an essential part of both scheduled and impromptu, and they're totally different. Don't come in unprepared to a scheduled meeting. There are various methods to communicate. Most of us are familiar with these. There are the face-to-face meetings, the telephone meetings, the instant messaging SMS type meetings, email communication, video communication, voice communication, using video or voice apps. There are wikis, paper documents, websites. There are just so many different methods to communicate. We need to be careful, though, to make sure that the method of communication we chose works for the content of what we're trying to communicate and is it a medium that the receiver will be able to better understand what we're trying to say. So, again, there are several factors to consider when we're communicating. As I said in the last slide, be sure to choose the correct medium to transmit the content. Do you really read every email that you receive in detail? Answer probably is no for a lot of us some of the time. So be sure not to flood your the people you're communicating with emails, especially with lots of detail hidden in the middle or end of the email. Remember that it takes time to switch from being a worker to being a listener. It takes active time to switch from doing something to listening to going back to doing something. So don't overload with lots of little instant kind of niggly kind of things. Um, Remember and question yourself, do you need a history of the communication? One great thing about email is there is a historical document you can hold on to. Text messaging using a messaging service, you might have those types of histories. But if it's an impromptu communication meeting in the hall, do you have a history of that? No. Should you keep a diary? Should you, after you have an impromptu conversation, go back to your desk or go back to a quiet place and write down what was said, write down what was transpired, write down what transpired? Maybe even send a confirmation email back to the other party saying, "So, in our impromptu meeting by the water cooler today, we discussed this and this and this. Um, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the details of that in the future. That way, everybody has a nice record of it." Um, and make sure that you got feedback from your listener. Make sure that the active listening was happening and that the receiver got the message. This presentation followed along with the chapter of CompTIA Project Plus Study Guide Exam by Kim Heldman. There's a reference to that book. This concludes our brief presentation on communication. This presentation is copyright 2020 by James Reneau Ph.D. You can contact me at jreneau@shawnee.edu with any input or feedback. Remember that this work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share Alike 4.0 International License, and I would like to say thank you for watching.